So you've been in New York for a long time, and AJ Przinsky despises New York.
I was
Everything
born
is
in New York.
exactly. He says there's always a New York bias. But the one thing that I want to hear from you is AJ's quote is the Mets will Met. Why is it year in and year out, besides 2015 when I got a World Series ring from them, why do the Mets Met? Is there something in that in the media? What is it? What is it?
Yeah, it was the New York bias that helped Derek Jeter win all those MVPs, I guess. Anyway, I think that the Mets have a cultural issue that probably was similar to the Red Sox at one point, which is when things go badly for a long period of time, you wait for the bad thing to happen. I'll share this story. The Mets were playing Colorado on a Sunday, probably about 5, 6 weeks ago. And at that point, they were probably hovering a month into the season at about 500. And my rule of thumb is when a team opens the building to reporters, I'm there. Because I think it's your job, but also you never know. You go up to the press box, maybe you see people who are rehabbing, working on the field, maybe you bump into people. You should be open to the possibility of reporting at all times. And it was a very quiet Sunday morning, and I was moving around the building a bit, and I could feel it. The thought I had is, the Wilpons could leave the Mets, but do the Wilpons ever really leave the Mets? Like all the security people, the traveling people, etc. There's an infrastructure there that Steve Cohen hasn't gotten to, and you could have convinced me the Mets' magic number to be eliminated was 1 that afternoon. About how downcast everyone was. They had lost the game the night before, a tough game, but it was still, again, I believe it was the first week of May, and it's just that feeling around it of negativity. Now, is that greater today with all teams because of social media, and nothing quite appeases people on social media like being miserable 24/7, 365? I don't know, but there is a pall of negativity, and that the shoe will drop around the Mets. And like the Red Sox, does that only change one of these years when you break through? Would we feel differently if the Mets in 15 would have beaten the Royals instead of losing to the Royals? I don't know, but it's been a long time since 1986 since they won, and there's definitely this sense of things will go wrong. And just even take this: they've been around since 1962. They've never made the playoffs 3 years in a row. I think they've only made it 2 years in a row twice in their history. I think they've only made the playoffs in the same decade once, in 1986 and 1988. And, you were talking about New York. There are inherent, especially financial advantages in New York where you think the playoff arc would be different, that they could do something sustained. But they simply have never been able to sustain success. They won 101 games last year, and for good chunks of the season, you could have argued were the best team in the sport. And then they got eliminated relatively quickly at home by San Diego. And then again, they built in the offseason, and I think the feeling was, oh, they'll be really good again, and they haven't been really good, obviously.
It felt like you were talking about the White Sox, not the Mets, not making the playoffs in back-to-back years and not doing that. I mean, why you got to take a shot at the White Sox? Why can't you just talk about the Mets?
I think you're making some stuff up here, AJ.
Thank you. That's what I tell them every day.
Yeah, I think that's called straw man in other parts of America, but yeah.
Okay.
Well, okay. So, Joel, lastly on the Mets, looking ahead at their schedule, it doesn't get much easier when you're running into Houston, some of their better pitchers this week. I know JV and Max are scheduled to pitch in this series. Then it's a Phillies team that's playing much better ball. Brewers have bounced back lately. Then they have the Giants running into the next month. My point being, I know it's a little early, but it's not that early anymore. If 3 weeks from now, they're in the same spot in the standings where they have zero chance, which I already think is the case in the division, and they're safe like they are now, 5.5 games back with a billion teams in front of them, are we going to be talking about others but focusing on Max Scherzer potentially being dealt by the team? Because if they're being realistic with themselves and they're not a playoff team, this team still needs a lot more farm system depth to be the Dodgers that they want to be and be a contender every year and finally make the playoffs in consistent seasons. So shouldn't they do that if we fast forward and this is what they look like?
I think it's good. Look, I think all teams have to be open to all possibilities, and it's when you become defiant, about positions you won't take. I think it's a mistake by front offices. Obviously, the Mets have put an awful lot into the middle of this pot. I would say that if they were to become sellers, they would be able to do two things that I think are important. I think that they could let their fan base know, hey, this is a Steve Cohn-owned team. We're selling today, but we're not rebuilding. And you could take a look in 16. The Yankees traded Andrew Miller and Aroldis Chapman and Carlos Beltran, and actually played better after they traded him. Almost made the playoffs that year, and then got to Game 7 of the ALCS the next year because they were kind of rearming as opposed to rebuilding. I think the Mets would be in the same situation. I think the other thing that makes the Mets interesting is Cohen is obviously willing to foot a bill. So if you put a guy like Scherzer out on the market or any of their players, to get the best possible return, Steve Cohen could simply pay the contract for the rest of the year. And I think that puts them in a different situation if they were open to it. I do think they want to try to wait to as late as possible. I think they want to see what this team might look like. I'll say this early on. Buck Showalter made such a big deal out of losing Jose Quintana, feeling that he would be kind of a lefty steadying force for them, somebody who would give them 6 innings pretty constantly. I think they want to see if they get to a point where can they get Scherzer and Verlander back better, Quintana back, and go round and round a little and see if they could ever get off a 15 out of 20, right? We might have had this conversation about should the Phillies be sellers 2 or 3 weeks ago, and suddenly the Phillies are a couple of games over 500. I think the Mets want to give themselves as much chance as possible between now and the middle, at least, of July to see what it looks like. But Scott, to your point, it would be foolish for them to fall, say, 10 or 12 under 500 and lose connection to even the final wild card and not have everything on the table because whatever their prospect base is, I think even they would admit their pitching prospect base is dreadful. And if they were selling, they've got to improve in that area.